Welcome to the Git tutorial. Here you will learn how to use Git from the command line, from Visual Studio Code, and from the Github Desktop App. This tutorial is around 2 hours long and you can watch it faster by changing the playback speed in the settings below the video player. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to support the web schools. Without further ado, let's get started with the Git tutorial. Hi, in this lesson we're going to cover the basic fundamentals of Git. Git is a free and open source distributed version control system. It allows us to track changes to our project files and go back to a specific version of the project at any point in time. Let's see a practical example of how it works. This is Jay, the web developer who created this weather forecast website. Jay decided he wanted to implement a new API to power the website. For a few days, he does all the necessary changes in the code for the website to work with the new API. When he starts testing the new service, he realizes the new API is not working as expected. So to avoid breaking his code even further, he decides to go back to the old API that was working just fine. Without Git, Jay would have to revert all the changes he did manually. He would have to remember all the parts of the code he changed and how things were before. Not only Jay was going to waste the whole afternoon fixing that, he would also be prone to miss something and introduce bugs to his code. But Jay uses Git, so he's not worried at all. He knows all the versions of the project are stored by Git in a timeline. So in order to revert the breaking changes, he only needs to run a single line of code. That's the beauty of Git. Git can benefit beginner developers by keeping their project safe, but Git is also powerful enough to support large organizations. Companies who have a team of developers have their code base stored in a hosting platform like GitHub or GitLab. This way, all developers can work on the project at the same time. For complex tasks, Git has a branching system that keeps everything smooth and clean. While Sarah starts a complex task that might take days or weeks to be completed, John can work on another feature simultaneously. When Sarah is done and her implementation passed quality tests, she can simply merge all her code to the main branch and publish it live. Then, when John finishes, he can also merge all his code to the main branch, which will include Sarah's code. The new version can then be published live safely. This is how big tech companies like Google can maintain hundreds of developers working together and deliver new features every day. So to recap, here are a few reasons why you should start using Git today. Git offers version control for easy rollbacks. Git can work on hosting platforms like GitHub for collaborative work. These platforms keep your code base and all its historical changes safe. Git also handles a complex branching system, so large software projects can be maintained smoothly. And you want to hear the good news? Git is very easy to use, even working from the command line, as long as we explore its functionalities step by step and understand each of them. So let's follow to the next video so we can get started. Hey there, in this video we're going to cover the Git installation. This video is going to be more focused on Windows because if you are a Mac user like myself, you will probably already have Git pre-installed on your machine. But let me quickly show you how you can check if that's the case. So if you are on a Mac computer, you can press Command Spacebar to open the search bar, and then you can search for the terminal, press Enter, and right here, if you type git -- version, this is what you should see. It doesn't have to be the same version as I'm showing right here, but as long as you don't have any error message, you can just move to the next video because you already have Git installed. So here on Windows, we can just search on Google for install Git, click the first search result, and then we're going to scroll down until the installing on Windows section. Let's click this link right here, and then at the top, there will be the link to download the correct version for your operating system. Let's click here, wait for the download to finish, and then we can start the installation. So this is already done. Let's click next. Let's leave it in the default folder. And here we can leave all the default settings. The Windows version will come with the Git Bash and the Git graphical user interface. We're not going to be using that, but just so you know that if you want to explore this option later, it is going to be installed as well. Here you have the option to create a start menu folder. I'm going to leave this here even though we're not going to use it because we're going to be typing Git code from the command line and Visual Studio Code. Now here, one thing that I think it's interesting to do, if you use Visual Studio Code, I prefer to use Visual Studio Code as the default editor. And later, you will see that when we have to resolve conflicts, everything will open inside VS Code, so things will be easier. When you're ready, click Next. And here you can decide if you are always going to use the main branch when you create a repo, or if you're going to let Git decide. Don't worry about this now. We're going to speak about branches, and this is going to be clear to you. I prefer to use the option Let Git Decide because you can work with some repos that don't use the branch main. And here we can leave the recommended option to use Git from the command line and also third-party software. We're going to be testing a desktop app for Git as well. So here we can just click Next in the next steps. Let's leave the default option for the Git pull. This is going to be explained later in the course as well. Let's just keep clicking Next until the last step and click Install to finish the installation. So now the installation is done. Let's just click Finish. And then we need to open a new command line. We can use Windows key R and then CMD. Now when we type Git, we already see that the command is recognized by Windows. So here we even have some instructions on the basic commands to use. We're going to go through some of them in the next lessons. If I type git -- version as I did on Mac, now you can see that Git is properly installed on our machine. Now, one thing that it's important to learn, let's go to the File Explorer. I'm going to open a new folder here for project 1, which is going to be the one I'm going to use as an example. You can do the same. And now we need to learn how to open a specific folder in the command line. We can just click the path bar at the top of the File Explorer, type CMD, and as you can see, we just opened the command line inside that specific folder. It's very important to pay attention to this because whenever you work with Git from the command line, you have to be inside the folder for each project. So if we're gonna work on project 1 right now, we need to have the command line inside that folder. All right, so now that we have Git installed and we have the correct folder open in the command line, we can move to the next video so we can get started with Git. Hi there, in this video I'm gonna give you some important tips about how to run Git. Let's get started with the command line or the terminal. If you're on Mac, you can just press Command, spacebar, and then you can just search for the terminal and press enter, and you can start writing Git commands. On Windows, you would just use the Windows key R and then type CMD to open the command line. One thing we need to pay attention to is that before typing anything related to Git, we need to make sure that we are inside the project's folder. So if we are working on a project and we want to use Git to track changes on it, we need to be inside its folder. So I'm going to show you how you can open the command line on a specific folder on both Windows and Mac. So let's get started with Mac. Let me just close this. I'm going to open the folder where I have the project. This is where I'm going to create the HTML, CSS files for our project. This is where our code base is going to be. This is the project's root folder, okay? I just created it for the course. Down here, we have the path of this folder. If you are not seeing this, you can, with your Finder window selected, you can go at the top here, go to View, and then you should see show path bar. Now, once you have it showing down here, you can just right click the projects folder and choose open in terminal. And now we are making sure that we are opening the terminal in the projects folder. On Windows, you can just open the folder on Windows Explorer. You click on the path and you type cmd, and then you are going to have the same result. So right here, we could start using Git comments on our projects. Now, there is an easier way to do this. If you want to use Git from the command line, I prefer using it inside Visual Studio Code, because then you are already inside your code editor, and when you're ready to do a comment or to push your changes to the remote server, you can do it inside the code editor. You don't have to go out of it. So let's go to Visual Studio Code. I'm going to open the folder of the project. So I'm going to go to File, Open Folder. I'm inside Visual Studio Code. I'm going to select the projects folder and I'm going to click Open. And right now I have it open on Visual Studio Code. We don't have any files yet. That's why we don't see anything here. But if we go to Terminal, New Terminal, we will see the same thing we had before. So this is just the command line or the terminal inside this specific folder. So it's important to learn how to do this first. Make sure you have your terminal open in the correct folder before you start typing Git code. So in this first part of the course, I think it's important for you to feel comfortable writing comments from the terminal. Even if you think it's easier to just use an application like GitHub Desktop or SourceTree, which are applications that we are going to show in the course, I think it's important that at least you know the basic commands. So if someday you have to run Git from the terminal, you're not going to be completely lost, okay? In the end, it's not going to be very difficult to use Git on a day-to-day basis. We will only have to memorize a few commands and they will be very easy to use. So in this section of the course, we're going to be using Git from here. There's another option, which is using the source code tab on Visual Studio Code. So if you go here to the source control tab, you will be able to use Git in a more user-friendly way. So there will be buttons that we will be able to press to do things instead of running the commands ourselves. We can't see anything here yet because we haven't created our repo. But as soon as we do so, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to be showing you how things work inside the source control as well. So let's move to the next video so we understand what is a repo, we create our first repo, and we start using Git. I'll see you then. Hello, in this video we're going to create our first repo. But first, what is a repo? This is a short for repository, and a repository is the collection of all the files of a project. A simple way to understand it is just thinking about the root folder of your project as your repo. So all the files that we are going to place inside, all the HTML, CSS, JavaScript files, images, everything that we have inside the projects folder is going to be part of the repo. And when you start a repo inside a project, it means that Git is going to do what we want it to do, which is tracking changes to the files and creating a history of versions. So in order for this to start happening, we need to start a repo first. We already know how to open the terminal inside the correct folder. We have it right here on Visual Studio Code. If you wanted an easier way to start a repo, if you go to the source control tab, you will see that you can just press this button to do it from here. But as I've said in the previous video, I think it's important to know how to use the command line first. So don't get intimidated by it. I promise you that all the commands we're going to run here are going to be very easy to understand. So don't feel intimidated by this. I know many people don't like using the command line, but you will see that all the commands I'm going to show in the course are going to be very simple to understand. So knowing that we are inside the projects folder, we can start a repo by just typing git init. Now, the reason why a lot of people feel intimidated by the command line is because we are going to start receiving messages. We don't have to be afraid of this. These are just hints. What's more important here is this sentence. Initialize empty Git repository in. So now we know that a Git repo has been initiated in this folder, meaning that everything we change here, all the files we add are going to be tracked by Git. If you go up here, so you read this message, this is just giving us some hints about the branch that we are using. We don't have to worry about this right now because we're going to have a dedicated lesson about branches. So you will see that this is nothing to be afraid of. This is something super simple, but for now we can just ignore this. The important thing here is that we started the repo. Now, if we go to the projects folder, it seems that nothing happened, but this is actually because the Git folder is hidden by default. On Mac, if you want to view the hidden files and folders, you can just use the Command Shift dot shortcut. So after pressing those keys, we can now see that there's this .git folder on our project. This is telling us that there is a repo in this folder. If you open up, there will be some config files and all that. You don't have to worry about this. We're actually not going to do anything with this folder. I just wanted to show you how you can check if there is already a Git repo on a folder. If you want to view it on Windows, it's very similar. Inside the File Explorer, you can just use the top menu, go to View, Show Hidden Items, and then you will see this folder. Now, if we go back to Visual Studio Code and we go to the source control panel again, now this is starting to look different. We don't have to worry about this right now. We're going to have a dedicated lesson about the source control panel. What's important to understand is that now we have a repo here and everything we do in our files, all the changes we do are being tracked by Git. So in the next video, we're going to create the first files in our project and learn some useful Git commands. I'll see you then. Hello, in this video, we're going to create the first files of our project and do our first commit. So in the Explorer tab on the left side, we can use this button to create a new file. This is going to be the index.html file of this website. To write the basic structure, I'm just going to use the shortcut on Visual Studio Code, so HTML5 to create the structure. This is going to be our website. Let me save this, and I'm also going to create a CSS file. So I'm just going to add a link to the CSS file called style.css. Let me save this. So I'm also going to create this file, so style.css. Now let's just type something here like body. Then we can just set the margin to 0 and the padding to 0. So now we created the first files of the project. We wrote some lines of code here, the basic HTML structure, something inside the body. We created the CSS file with some code on it. So now how do we create a version for it? Because that's what we are looking for with Git, right? We want to create versions that later, if something goes wrong, we can go back to a previous version. How do we do this? This is going to be done by commits. Every commit you do is going to create a new version. But before we create our first commit, we need to understand something important about Git. So let me just put this up so we can see this better. There is a command that is important for you to know, which is the git status. So let's write git status. This is going to give us some important information about our repo. So on the first line, we can see on branch master. We don't have to worry about this now because when we speak about branches in a dedicated lesson, it's going to be clear to you why we need to know this. It's also telling us that we didn't create any commits yet. We are going to create our first commit in a second. But something that is important to understand first is this section here. It's telling us we have some untracked files. So as you can see, Git knows what we're doing. Git knows that we created these files. These are new files. This first one, you can just ignore this. This is automatically created by the Mac OS operating system. If you are using Windows, you won't be seeing this. We don't need this for anything. So what's important here is that every time we add files to our project, we need to tell Git that we want to track them. If we create a new commit right now, which you can think of as a version of the project, so this is the first version of the project. We could call it like V1. So it's the version where we just created the HTML and CSS files and wrote some lines of code. This is the V1 of our project. In order to create a version, we're going to have to create a commit. But if we are not tracking these files, then Git is not going to save them in this version. So when you begin your repo and every time you add new files to the project, you need to make sure that they are being tracked. So to do that, we have a few options. The most common ones are either you select a specific file. So in this case, if we wanted to track changes only in the index file, for example, we could write git add then index.html. We do this, and now if we run again a git status, we can see that now it looks a bit different. Now we have this section here that says changes to be committed, which has the HTML file, and it is telling us that we also have these files, but changes are not being tracked on them. And what you see here is the staging area. So this is an important concept in Git. Every time you have tracked files that have new changes, they are going to show in the staging area. So this means that Git is tracking the changes, but we didn't create a version for them yet. We're going to do that in a moment with the commit command. But I just wanted to show you how you can add files to the staging area first. Another option, if you don't want to be typing git add for every file you have, let's say you added 20 new images to your project, you're not going to be typing their names. So if you want to just add all the files, you could just type git add and then a dot. Now, if we run git status again, you will see that all the files have been included to the staging area. And this is something that we won't have to run every time, because now that these files are being tracked, every time we do changes to them, Git is going to be tracking and adding them to the staging area. So this git add command, we only have to run when we have new files added to the project. Now, if we quickly move to the source control panel on Visual Studio Code, again, don't worry too much about this because we're going to have a dedicated lesson about this. But for now, we can see that we have these files in the staging area. So here it says staged changes. So Git is tracking these changes, and in order to create a version for this, we need to run a commit. As you can see from the source control, we can do this by just pressing a button. But we're going to go back here a bit later. For now, let's stay in the command line. I'm just going to clear the terminal just so everything I type show at the top here. So now that we have all the files in the staging area, we can create the first version. We have, let's say, the V1 of our website. We just created the most basic files, the HTML and the CSS file, and we're going to stop our work for the day. So before we do that, we run a commit, so we create a version of this specific point in time where our project is. And to do that, we are going to use the git commit command, which is going to create this version. So it's important to understand that every commit you do will be stored as a version of your project. One thing we have to add here is the -m and then a message that we want to include with our commit. It is important that this message is meaningful, meaning that I'm not just going to be typing V1 or V2. It's better that you write exactly what you did since the last version. So since this is our first commit, we just initiated the project. So we could type something like initiated the project. You could type more like an added index and style.css. We don't have to be that specific. I think this is clear enough. So we just initiated the project and created the two first files. This is a good enough message for a commit, because when we go back in time, we're going to have a list with all the versions with this message. So by looking at the messages, if we are searching for something specific, it has to be clear by the commit messages. Let's say you made an update, you added a new API to your website. So if you create a commit that says V8 made some changes, then it's going to be hard to know later what you did there. But if you create a commit that says started using the XYZ API, then it's going to be very easy to find what you are looking for. So right now, we just have all the changes being tracked. We saw on Git status that we have all those files in the staging area, meaning Git is just waiting for us to run a commit to save that version. So now we can run this, and we just created a new commit, which means that this is a version that in the future, if we want to check what we had, how our code looked like on that version, if we want to go back to that version, we can do that with a single line of code. Now, if we go to the source control again, we don't have anything in the staging area. Everything is clear, and we have the first commit created. Now, from the command line, some useful things we can do here. So the first one we already know, which is the Git status, that it's always going to tell us what is the status of our repo. So here we have nothing to commit. We have a clean working tree, which means that we don't have any changes to save here. Everything we did since the last version was already committed. Now, the second thing that is also interesting is running a Git log. If you run a Git log, it's going to give you the list of the commits that you have in your project. So as you can see, our project only has one commit, and here's the message that we created that said initiated the project. Right now, you might be thinking that if you have a big project that a lot of people are working on it, it's going to be very hard to find stuff from the command line. And I agree 100% with that. So with a big project, when we are trying to find specific commits, if we're trying to revert our repo to that specific point in time, we're not going to be working from the command line. Then this is when I think it's much easier to just use a Git client. I know some people that even for complex tasks, they still use the command line, but most people just use Git clients. And later in the course, you are going to learn how to use them as well. I just want you to feel comfortable with the command line as well, because that's going to make a lot of difference on how you work with Git. So now that we know how to start tracking files, we know what is the staging area and how to create the first commit. Let's go to the next video so we continue to learn more cool things about Git. I'll see you then. Hey everyone, in the previous video we learned some important concepts in Git. We made our first commit, and now let's speak about something important, which is how often should you commit? Should you just commit every little change you do? Should you do it by the end of the day? What is the ideal amount of work to be committed? So the rule I use is the following. If I'm doing something that takes only a few hours, I'm going to wait until I'm done with that functionality before I commit. So I'm going to give you one example. Let's run our project in the browser. Now we know we don't have anything. We just wrote our website in the HTML file. We don't have anything yet. So now I'm going to start creating the header, right? So I can go back to Visual Studio Code, go to the HTML file. Let me just minimize the terminal. And now I can come here, and instead of having this, I can start the header. So I'm going to add the header. When I'm doing this, normally I go saving. So I go pressing Ctrl S to keep saving my changes. Does it mean that now is a good time to commit? No, because this is something that it's only going to take me a couple of hours to be done. So there's no reason why I should commit this right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the whole header. And then when I finish it, I'm going to make a commit, because then it's going to make sense to create a version with these changes. We're going to have a version that now has the header. So let's use this part as an example. I'm just going to copy and paste HTML and CSS code here, because in the end, the focus of this course is the Git part. So I'm just going to paste this HTML. This is the header that we used in the JavaScript project. So we have all the code for the header. I'm going to close this. Let me also copy the CSS for it. Here it is. Let me save this. Let's go to the browser to see what we have. So now we have something here. We just had a blank page, and now we have the header done. If we were working on a company, this would probably be a ticket. There will be a ticket in Jira or in any other project management application that would tell us to build the header. We would have all the specifications, the fonts we need to use, the colors, and all that. So let's say we just finished the ticket. We just did the header. Everything is working fine. We don't have any JavaScript, so this is not going to work for now, but this is good enough for our example. So let's say it took me 1 hour to do this. Now I'm done with the header and I'm ready to start with the next section, which means that this is a good point to do a commit, because we didn't have a header and now we have a fully working header. So this is more or less the rule I use. Actually, the first rule, because I'm going to tell you about the second in a moment. So the first rule I use is, if I'm building a functionality that I'm going to finish in the same day, I wait until I finish it to do a commit. So in this case, this is done. This is looking good. It seems to be working. So I'm going to run a commit. So let's go to the terminal again. Let me just put it bigger. Let me clear it. And now what happens if we run a git status? As you can see, Git is tracking the changes we did, but the files are not in the staging area. So every time we are about to run a commit, let's not forget to add all the files we have to the staging area, unless for some reason you don't want a specific file to be included. But most of the times you will just want to include everything. So this is more or less the workflow that you're going to follow if you use the command line. You would just type git add dot, then you add everything. If you want to run a git status again, you can see that now both of the files are in the staging area. So now we are ready to run a commit. So let's do git commit -m for the message. That's a very important part. And then we can type something like header section finished. We can do this, and now all the changes we did are safe. Git just created a new version, and if for some reason there's a bug, there's something that we need to revert on these changes we did, we can easily revert to the previous version. So now again, if we run a git log, we will see that now we have 2 commits. So we have one where we initiated the project, and then we have another one where we finalize the header section, okay? So this is more or less how often I do commits. If I'm doing something that's going to take a few hours, I wait until I finish and then I run a commit. But if you're doing something that's going to take more than a day, then I would recommend by the end of the day running a commit, because in the end, we're not using Git only so we have all the versions. We are using Git to also make sure that our code base is safe. Right now, it is only stored in our computer, but a bit later in the course, we are going to create a GitHub account to make sure that our code is safe on GitHub. So if we go to sleep and tomorrow something happens to our computer, we can't turn it on, we know that the code base is safe on Git. So another rule of thumb for me is every time I finish the day, even if I'm in the middle of a functionality, I'm going to create a commit, maybe saying finalize part of the header, only this part missing or something like that. Always try to keep your messages short but meaningful, meaning that any person that reads through these messages, they will know what has been done in those versions. Alright, so now we are ready to move on. I know we are just getting started, but if you are working on a simple project that only has one branch, the comments that I just showed you are the only comments that you are going to use most of the time. So you're just going to be changing files and then adding them to the staging environment and creating comments. There will be one extra step, which is going to be push your changes to the remote server when you start using GitHub. But this is going to be just as simple as what we are doing here. So as you can see, it's not hard to use Git from the command line. But I know many people prefer to use a more user-friendly version. So in the next video, we are going to see some examples of what we just did, but using the Git source control panel. So I'll see you then. Hey there, as promised, in this video, I'm gonna show you how you can do the actions that we learned in the previous videos, but this time using VS Code's source control. We're not done with the terminal yet. We're still gonna go back here and do some things from here, but from this point on in the course, we're gonna be using both the terminal and VS Code source control. So I'm gonna minimize the terminal for now, and let's go to the source control tab. And right here, we're going to be able to do the same things we've done before. So let's start with a simple example. I'm just going to change anything here to my CSS. So let's say the font size shouldn't be 16, but 18. I'm going to do this, and when I press save, as you can see, the change we did is going to be showing here. We need to be careful because when we do changes and they appear here, they are not in the staging area yet. So if we hover over where it says M, it's saying that it's modified, but this is not included to the staging area. That's why we are seeing this plus button, which we can use to stage the changes. But we're not going to be using this one because normally in a project, we're not going to be just adding a single file. For example, if we go to the HTML and add something here as well, so let's say we start a new main section, and we save this, both of them are going to show, so we would have to add both to the staging area. So instead of doing this, we can go up here where it says changes, and if we press this button, it is going to add all the changes to the staging area, so this is going to be much faster, okay? Before we do that, let me just show you something interesting. So if we go back to the CSS file and we go back to what we had before, so instead of 18, we go back to 16. As you can see, Git is smart enough to understand that we went back to something that was already like this. So it's not keeping the file, even though we changed it 2 times, it's not keeping the file here because it compares the state of our file in the previous version. So it knows that we didn't do any changes. Even though we changed to 18, then we went back to 16. For Git, there hasn't been any changes comparing to the previous version. So this is something cool. But for now, let me just leave it at 18 for our example. And as I've mentioned, if you want to add all the files to the staging changes, and by the way, you shouldn't be coming here and doing that. You should only do this when you are ready to commit. So let's say we finished the main section. Now it's time to go here and just add all the changes to the staging area. So here this button says stage all changes. If you want to undo everything that you've done with these more recent changes, you can just press this button here. So let me try with the index file. If I press this button, discard changes, let me confirm it. If we go back to the HTML file, as you can see now, the main element that we opened is not here anymore. So this is another cool thing about Git. Before we did anything, before adding to the staging area, before committing, we can already undo a set of changes. For this example, let me just add it again. I just wanted to show that you can do this. So I'm just going to leave this main element here. I'm going to save this. And if we look on the left side, now we have these 2 files that were changed. If you check from the terminal, so let's try a git status. We can see that these files have been modified, but they are not in the staging area. So to do this from the Git source control, we can just go here where it says changes. You can also undo everything in all files if you want with this button. But for this example, we are just going to stage all changes. So we can press here. Now we have all the changes staged. We don't have anything below changes anymore. Everything we have is below staged changes. So like I said before, you don't have to worry about this because the workflow is not going to be adding these files every time you change something. The idea is that when you finish something and you're ready to do a commit, then you stage the changes and do the commit. So if we run git status here, now we can see that the files are staged. If you are using the Git source control, of course, you're not going to be using both. I'm just doing this so we can see these changes. So let me minimize this. This is going to be the workflow. You do changes. When you're ready to do a commit, you're just going to add all the files and now you can create a new commit. So now we can just press the commit button. If you go to this arrow down here, you will see that we have more options, but these two, we're only going to use them when we have a remote repo. So when we start using GitHub and our repo is stored on GitHub, then we are going to start using these buttons. For now, we can't do that. We can just do local commits. So I'm going to press commit. But if you do that directly, it is going to ask you to type the message inside this file. So this can be a bit confusing. So instead of doing this, I think it's easier that you just type the message here and then you press commit. So again, let's remember to keep the messages short but meaningful. So in this case, I can write something like adjusted font size on header and started the main section. As you can see, Git is telling us that this is 7 characters over 50 in current line. So it doesn't mean that we can only enter messages below 50 characters, but most developers would recommend that we keep it below 50. Sometimes you're not going to be able to, but most of the times it is better that you try to find a shorter message. So in this case, I could just change this to adjust font size and started the main section. So this is below 50, this is fine. And if I want to run a commit, I can just press the button now and a new version of it has been created. Again, we can go to the terminal just to see this real quick. Let me clear it and we can type git log and we can see all the changes done to our project. So we initiated the project, we have the date and exact time, then we created the header section, then we adjusted the font size and started the main section. So as you can see, the more meaningful your commit messages are, the easier it's going to be for you to understand what you did in each version. Now, before we finish this video, I just want to show you a shortcut that can be very helpful to you when working with Git. So let me just add something here like main section content. I'm going to save this and we can see the changes here. Before running a commit, we would have to stage the changes. I just want to show you that everything you do through buttons here, you can also do through the command palette. So if you press Ctrl-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P, you will open the command palette. And if you type Git, you can see that you have all the actions that you can do from here as well. All right, so we are now ready to move to the next video. I'll see you then. Hey there, in this video, you're going to do your first exercise of the course. So here's what I want you to do. Create a new folder on your computer and initiate a Git repo on it. Then do the following actions. Create a new HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files with the proper links and create a commit for that first version. Next, add an h1 to your HTML file. You can write anything on it, like this is the title of my website or whatever you want to write inside of it. Then create a new commit for that change. You can now pause the video and do this exercise. And when you're done, come back here because I'm going to be doing this using both the command line and VS Code's source control. You can use either of them, whichever works best to you. Alright, so I hope you completed this exercise without any problems. So let me open 2 new folders here because I'm going to do both from the command line and also from VS Code source control. So I'm going to start this new folder. I'm going to name this exercise 1-VS Code. And I'm going to open one called exercise 1-terminal. Alright, so on Visual Studio Code, let's get started with the source control. So I'm going to open a folder. Let's choose the VS Code first. So this is a new project that I'm starting out. I don't have a repo here yet. If we go to this section, you will see that it's telling us that we don't have a Git repo yet. So if you want to do things from the source control, we know that it's very easy to do so. We can just press this button to initialize the repo. And now if you go back to the folder, you will be able to see that Git hidden folder. So we already initiated the new repo. Now we are going to go back to the Explorer. Let's do what the exercise asked. So I'm going to add an index.html file. Let me write the HTML basic structure right here. I'm going to also add a CSS file and a JavaScript file. So for that, I'm going to add a script. Let's type main.js. For this one, it's actually better to place it inside the body before we close the body tag. And the CSS can stay in the head section. So now I'm going to create the style.css file and the main.js file. This would be like the starting point of any project. Now we would be ready to build anything using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So now what can we do? Let's create a first version, which is the initialization of the project. So if we go here, let's remember that everything we did is not in the staging area yet. So let's add everything at the same time using the plus button. So now everything we did is staged. And now we can write a message saying something like initiated the project. Let's type commit, and now we have the first version. So now the second thing, we were asked to open an H1 to add a title. Let's write something like this is the title of the article or whatever. I'm going to save this. And again, Git knows that it has been changed, but it's not staged yet. So let's click the plus button to stage all the files. And now we can type something meaningful here, like added the H1 to the page. Let me run a comment, and now the exercise is done through the source code. So now let's do the same thing using the command line. So let me open that folder. So file, open folder. This is the one that we're going to do from the terminal. So again, if we go to the source control, we don't have anything yet. So you choose if you initiate the repo now or if you initiate it later. It doesn't make a lot of difference. So this time, just to do a bit differently, let me create the files first. So the index.html, style.css, and the main.js. Let's go to the index file. Let's create the basic HTML structure. Let's add the link to the CSS. If you want to skip these steps, it's completely fine. The idea here is just using Git. It's not to actually write HTML code. But I'm going to do it anyway. It's super quick. So now we have the proper HTML structure. And now let's open the terminal. We know that every time we want to run a new terminal, we can just go here to terminal, new terminal. And we don't have a repo here yet. So first we need to initiate it. So we can type git init. And now let's remember we have this message about the branch. We can ignore this for now. We're going to speak about branches later. So now we have a Git repo. If we go to the source control, we can see it, but this time let's just use the terminal. So to add all the files to the staging area, we can use git add dot. Before running the commit, I think it's a good practice to always use the git status command. So then you can see if for any reason there's a file that's not included, but here we can see that all the files are staged. So they are marked here in the changes to be committed. So it's all fine. So now we can run a commit. We can just run git commit -m for the message. And then we can type, what did we type last time? I think it was initiated the project. We do this and now we have this commit. If we run, let me just clear this real quick. If we run git log, we can see that we have this commit. Now let's do the change in the HTML file. Let's just minimize the terminal and I'm going to add the age one to the body. This is the title of the article. Now, if we go back to the terminal and we type git status, we can see that we have one change that Git identified, but this has not been staged. So before doing any commit, first thing you need to do, stage all the changes. So you can do git add point to add everything so you don't have to worry. You could also write git add index.html, but it's just easier to just type git add dot and always add everything. We can do this and now we can just create the commit. So git commit -m, added the title to the article. We press enter. If we type git status, we have a clean working tree, no changes to be saved. And if we type git log, we can now see both our commits. So that was it for this exercise. If you have any questions, you can always use the Q&A section and I can help you out. I'll see you in the next video. Hi there, in this section we're gonna speak about something super important in Git, which are branches. Without branches, I don't know how large software projects would even be possible. So let me show you a quick example so you understand the importance of branches. This is the project that we finalized in the JavaScript section of the course. I have it right here, I'm just gonna use it as an example. So it is also open on Visual Studio Code. As you can see, it has a repo, changes are being tracked, and all that. So going back here, let's say we have a new section that we need to build on this website. Our boss told us to start a new newsletter section between these two sections. So we are going to start working in the code. Let's remember that right here we are in the master branch. This is the only branch we have. So let's work without branches for now. So it is clear why this is not going to be a good idea. So after the gallery, I'm going to start a new section here. Again, this is just an example. You don't have to write any HTML code. You can just focus in the Git part. So I'm going to add a new section here with an ID of newsletter. I'm going to add an H2 and type newsletter. So if we save this and we go back to the browser, we have this section starting to appear here. So we are in the middle of doing something. This is not done yet. So if we had to publish this file right now, we couldn't include this section because this is not finished yet. We can only publish this new section when it's completely finished. So while we are in the middle of doing this, our boss calls us and says we need to do some very important change that is urgent. He wants us to change the title that appears at the top of the page. But now we have a problem because if we want to make that change, we can go back to the code and say, okay, I'm going to go to the header and I'm going to do the change you want me to do. So let's go up there and where it says JavaScript Flash course, let's say we need to change this to JavaScript Complete course. We can save this and now we can publish this part. The problem is that we already added this to the same file. If we go back to Visual Studio Code, we can see that both changes are in the same file. So how can we publish the fix that we did to the header without the newsletter part? Because the newsletter part is still unfinished. If we weren't using Git correctly, the first idea that would come to mind would be, let's go down there, let's maybe comment this section, or let's cut it with Ctrl X, let's paste it somewhere else, do the change that we have to do in the website, and then we can continue working on this section. But if you do this in a large company, if you have a team of developers and everyone is doing this, things are going to become a mess very, very quickly, and you are going to see a lot of bugs in the code. This is not how we should do it. Actually, we are using Git exactly because we want to avoid those kinds of actions, because they will introduce too many bugs to our code. So this is why if you have a team of developers, and even for single developers working on a small project, we can see that branches are very important, because with branches we can start features that will take long, but we still have the main branch if we need to do any urgent fixes in the live version of the website. So in the next lesson, you are going to learn how to create branches and work with them. I'm also going to show you a very important workflow that's going to help you a lot working on real teams. I'll see you in the next video. Hi there, in this video you will learn how to work with branches. But before we dive into writing all the Git comments to create new branches, let me show you two important things. What you're seeing right in front of you is the Jira software. This is probably the most popular project management software in the web development world. And I have this here because before creating the branch, I think it's important for you to understand, if you work for a company as a web developer, I think it's cool to see how you would receive work to be done on the website. So I'm going to use the same examples that we had in the previous video about fixing something in the header of the website and also adding a new newsletter section. So we would have tickets, right? We can see that tickets have a number. In this case, it's OC2-52. This one is 53. This one is for me. This one is for another person. This is just for the sake of this example. So what I would do as a developer is I would get my ticket, which is building the newsletter section. I would move it to in progress, and then I'm ready to create the branch and start working on the task. The other developer that will get this one would move it to and create his own branch for this fix. This way, neither of us are messing with the code that is published live. So we always have a clean branch that reflects exactly what's published live. Now a quick timeline just so we have a graphical representation of what's going to be done. So here we have the main branch, which in our project it's called the master branch. I'm going to show you this in Visual Studio Code in a second. Then I would start my branch to build the newsletter section, and it's a good practice to include the ticket in the branch name. This way, when you look at historical data, it's much easier to identify what work has been done, because we can always open the ticket in Jira and see all the details. So here I would open my branch, I would call it OC2-52, then dash newsletter section. My fellow developer would open his own branch called OC2-53-fix website title. So then both of us can start working without any conflicts in the code. Just to show you inside the ticket, so this one, for example, it says build newsletter section. This is how a project manager would open the ticket. This is just an example. So build newsletter section, he would include a picture so we know what we have to build. Then here the link to the design. If you open this, you as a web developer would have access to the inspector, so you can see all the colors, font sizes, and all that, and telling you where to place that element. So right after the gallery, before the product section, we would build that new component. This is how you as a web developer normally would receive work to be done. The other one is the same, it's just much simpler. Change JavaScript Flash course to JavaScript complete course. This is the task that the other developer will work on. Now let's go back to Visual Studio Code so we can see how it works. The first important thing to notice here is that we have the name of the branch down here. So right now we only have one branch, which is the master branch. Every time you're working on something, you should look here first to make sure you are in the correct branch. So now I'm going to create the branch to do the changes that I need to do. Let's do it from the command line first, and then for the other branch, we can do from the source control from Visual Studio Code. So let me open a terminal window so we can run the commands. One thing that's really important is every time you're working with branches, creating new branches, merging branches, always make sure that you don't have any files in the staging area. If we go here to the source control, you will see that I don't have any pending changes. So if I had, it would be better that I commit my changes before I do these actions. The same thing goes if you have a remote server. It's always good that you sync with the remote server, especially if you're working with a team of developers, because then you make sure that all new changes that have been recently pushed to the remote server will be synced to your computer before you start a new branch. But we're going to speak about remote repos later. The most important thing to remember is that you should have things updated. So no pending changes, everything's synced up. So now we are ready to create our first branch. To create a branch here, we are going to use the git checkout command. And this is going to be the same command that we are going to use to switch between branches. So if you use this command, but the branch does not exist, you need to use the -b switch. What this is going to do is create the branch first and then switch to it. So let's remember the ticket number for the newsletter section. So we have OC252. So I would name this branch like OC252 newsletter section. Let's press enter. We switched to it. If you see down here, you will see that this is the branch we are at the moment. If we want to do anything on the master branch, we could do git checkout master. And you see down here that now we are in the master branch. So it's always important that you check which branch you're working on before making any changes to the files. So let me go back to the other one. Let's just be careful here. Remove the -b. So now we just want to switch to this branch. We just switched. And if we run git branch, we have a list of the branches we have in our project. This is also nice if you want to switch to a branch, but you're not sure the name. You can run git branch and then you can just copy it from here and use the git checkout to go to this branch. Pretty cool. So now we have our branch. We can safely start working in the newsletter section. So we can go here to the index file. Let me just minimize the terminal. Actually, I'm going to close it. So I can go here and look for the gallery. The gallery is right here. So this is where the ticket tells us to add the newsletter section. So I can add the newsletter section. I'm going to give it an ID of newsletter. Inside here, we could add a form, an input for the email, and an input for the button. We could also add an H3 right here, saying sign up to our newsletter. Let's also add a value to the submit, something like subscribe. And when we go back to the page, we can see that the HTML structure is done. Right here, we would be ready to start working on the CSS. So let's say we are going to finish the work for the day. Let's make a commit for this part. If you want, you can do it from the terminal, but you can also use the source control. Make sure you are in the correct branch always. We can see the changes listed here. Let's add the changes to the staging area. And now we can write a comment like HTML structure for the newsletter section. If you want, you can also include the ticket number in the beginning or at the end, like OC252. Like I said, it's easier to track later what feature that was about. So now we can just run the commit, and this is all good. Now the developer that works with us can also create his branch. So in this case, he would have to be in the master branch first. If you want to switch branches from the source control, let me show you a cool shortcut. You can use Control-Shift-P or Command-Shift-P, and you can type Git, so you have all the Git commands. So in this case, we are trying to check out. So you could write Git checkout to, click here, and then it's going to ask you if you want to create a new branch, or you can select it from the list. So it's a bit easier to do it from here. So we can switch to master, and when we switch to the master, it's important to see that we are not seeing the newsletter anymore. That code is only in the other branch. So this is what the other developer would have, and he would be able to create his branch as well. So doing from the source control, we would use the shortcut again. So Command-Shift-P, Git checkout. We can create a new branch. In this case, it's OC253, the ticket number, and fixes to header. We don't have to be that specific about what fix is this because we already have the ticket number here. So we can easily go to Jira and check what this was about. So let's press enter. And now we created the branch and we are on it. So we can go here. The ticket says we need to change this to JavaScript complete course. We do the change. We add it to the staging area, and then we add a message like OC253 changed header title or something like this. This is the message for the commit. So let's commit the change. Always make sure to see if you are in the correct branch. We can send the commit. So now both of us are working on our features. This one is already finished. This one can be published to the website live, and the other one is going to be there for longer because we need to finish that section. So in the next video, let's see how we can merge branches so we can prepare this change to go live while we work in the other one. I'll see you then. Hey there, in this video, you're going to learn how to merge branches. So looking at the Jira board again, let's remember that we opened these two branches to work on these two separate projects. So this one that was smaller is already finished. So the developer would move it to the done and publish it on a test environment. Then the software tester would get the ticket and move it to test ongoing and would check if the change has been done. So as you can see right here, it reads JavaScript complete course instead of flash course. And this was the description of the ticket. So if the tester approves it, he will move it to approved. And now it's time to merge this branch and publish it live. So the web developer that did it would just go to Visual Studio Code. So here we have the branch for that feature. We can see that we don't have anything pending right here. So we have a clean working tree. So we can already run the command to do the merge. First, let's move to the master branch. Remember that that's the branch where we have an exact copy of what is published live. So the code that is there, we are sure it's working 100%. And now that this new feature is approved, we can merge it to the master branch. So let's switch it to the master branch. If you want to use the command line, you can. I'm just going to do it from the Command-Shift-P. Go to Git checkout, and then let's move to master. Now, if you want to do the merge from the terminal, let me just tell you the command that you can run. First, we would run git branch, just so we have the name of the branches. For merging, I think it's easier to just use the source control, but let me just show you how you can do it from here. So we run git branch. We know that right now we are on master. We can also see down here, and this is the branch that we want to merge, fixes to header. So the command that we would write here would be git merge and the name of the branch. This is the one. We can press enter, and now we just merged our branch. If we type git log Now we can see the commits we did in the other branch. So let's remember that in the master branch, we only had initiated the repo. Now we have that commit that we've done. This other one that you've seen right here was just a small correction that I did after I finished recording the video that I noticed was wrong. So these are the commits that we did in the other branch. As you can see, once we merged that branch with master, those commits have been included in the master branch. And this is really cool about Git because as you can see, we have the complete historical data of our project. It's not that we just have something telling us there was a merge. No, we have the actual commits. We have the original commits that later in the course, you'll see how you can view exactly the changes that have been done on each commit. So this is really cool. We have all the changes on master, which is the branch that it's published live on our website. Let me just clear this real quick and type git status. Just so we see something, there's nothing to comment. We have a clean working tree. So the developer would tell the team that this feature is ready to be published, which means that we could move the changed files to the server, which means we would create a package with all the files and send it to the hosting server. Now, one thing to pay attention, if we type git branch, we can see that that branch still exists. If you are using a system like Gitflow, we may speak more about Gitflow later in the course. Once you merge a feature to the master branch, it is going to be automatically deleted, but not in this case. So since in this case, we already have all the changes we need in the master branch, we can delete this branch so we don't have the list of branches polluted. The easiest way to delete a branch, and before you do that, of course, make sure that the merge worked correctly, make sure that the changes are in the master, maybe take a look at how it looks in the website. So you can look here. Seems it is correct. So now we can delete that branch. I think the easiest way to do this is just run Command-Shift-P and go to git delete branch. Now we can just select the one we want to delete, which is the fixes to the header, and the branch has been deleted. If we run again git branch, now we don't have it in the list anymore. We only have the master, which is our main branch for the project, and this feature that is still being developed. Now, if you wanted to delete a branch from here, let's say this one, I'm not going to do this now, but if you wanted to do it, you could just type git branch 2 dashes delete and then the branch name. You would do this and you would delete the branch. The only thing to pay attention is that if we are inside the branch and we try to delete it, we might see an error. So it's important that we are on master, so we delete other branches, okay? So that was all for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Hey there, in this video, we're gonna speak about something not so pleasant, but very important in Git, which is managing conflicts. What we've seen so far worked in a very straightforward way. We just do our work, merge with the master branch, and we can publish it live, and other people can work on the project and do the same thing. But the problem is sometimes we're gonna have conflicts. Let me just use a very quick example here. Let me just show you a very simple example. So I am in the OC252 newsletter section. So let's remember that my job here was to create a new newsletter sign up section. So let's say I'm working here and someone asks me to do something in the title of the website. So remember that in the master branch, we already changed this to JavaScript/course. But while I'm doing this task, someone asks me to include an exclamation mark in the title. I don't think it would make much sense to do this with the newsletter, but this is just an example. So someone just asked us to include one exclamation mark at the end of the title. We don't know that the title changed because when we started doing our work, we didn't have that change. Normally, you would merge with the remote branch every day, so we could possibly already have this change in our branch, but this is a subject for later when we speak about remote repos. For now, let's just think that we are not aware of that change, but this is what they asked us to do. So we did it. Let's say we are finished with the newsletter as well. So now we are ready to do the tests, and if all approved, we can merge this with master. Let me just commit this last change. I'm going to type included exclamation mark in the title. Let me just add to the staging area. Now we can commit. Let's say everything's approved. Let's go to Jira just so we be consistent here. So it's done. I published the test environment. It was tested by a software tester. We can see right here that we have the exclamation mark. So this is approved. This is ready to be published. So the project manager asks us to include in the next release. So we need to merge this with master. It's completely clean. We are ready to switch branches. So I'm just going to check out to master. And now we are ready to merge. So to merge again, let's use git merge branch. Let's merge it with OC52 to master. And now there's something different here. It wasn't as straightforward as before. We can see that the name of the file is in red. We have some warnings here, and we weren't able to do the merge. And why is that? This is because there is a conflict. Because in our version, we had JavaScript Flash Course, and we included an exclamation mark. But in the current master version, we already had it as JavaScript Complete Course. So what happens here is Git sometimes is smart enough to merge all the changes. You see that when we work on different sections, we can do the merge without any problem. Git will analyze both codes and do the merges automatically. But sometimes Git is not sure what to do. Should we leave JavaScript Complete Course? Should we leave JavaScript Complete Course with the exclamation mark? What should we do here? So in those cases, Git is not going to make that decision. It is going to throw the ball to you. So it's just telling us there's a conflict. We need to know what do you want to keep here. So using the source control, it's very simple. We can just go to reserve in merge editor. This is the incoming, which is JavaScript Flash Course with an exclamation mark. This is the one that was on master, so JavaScript Complete Course. And now we have the result. Git is suggesting this, but we know that this is not correct. In this case, we would speak to the developers, speak to the project manager to see what is the correct one. So in this case, it's going to be something that Git didn't predict, which is the new title that changed. So JavaScript Complete Course plus the exclamation mark that they asked to include after. So this would be the correct code to be live. This means that we are resolving this conflict manually. Now we can click complete merge. We have some changes staged, which is the one we just did. And this time we're going to have to comment because we resolved conflict. So if you want, you can also add resolved conflict, even though this is not completely necessary. Now it's actually too long. When we see this merge branch comment, it's because we had to resolve a conflict. So we can just do the commit. And now let's open the terminal. If we go to git log, let's see what happened here. This is starting to get really cool. So let's go to the beginning of it when we change the header title. So these were the commits that were the most recent on master. Then we have that commit that we included the exclamation mark. And now we will see a list of all the commits, including the 2 features we've made. So even though there was a conflict, Git let us resolve the conflict manually. So now we have everything on master. If we go to the files, let me just close the terminal. We see right here the index.html. It says JavaScript Complete Course, exclamation mark, which includes both changes. So now let's remember to delete the other branch. We don't need it anymore. So git delete branch. This is the branch we want to delete. So right now, if we type git status, we have a clean working tree on master and we don't have other open branches. which should reflect what we have in Jira. We don't have anything open in Jira. We don't have any open branches for features. So that was all for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Hey there, in this section, you're going to learn how to use remote Git servers, such as GitHub. GitHub is not the only option. If you type GitHub alternatives in Google, you will see some other servers you can use. I've used GitLab for a few years in a company I worked for. It works great. I have nothing to complain about GitLab. For the other ones, I have no practical experience with them, but you can read more about them if you research on Google. For the course, we're going to use the most popular one, which is GitHub. If you already have a GitHub account, you can just go ahead and sign in. If you don't, you can click at the top right where it says sign up, and then the login process is really cool. This animation made probably with CSS and some JavaScript. So I'm going to fill in my details. Now we need to complete this puzzle so we can create our account. Create account. And now I have to go to my email to check the code. So here you can just mark whatever is correct to you. As you can see, we have more things other than what we are going to do, which is collaborative coding. We have automation for releasing new versions of your site or application. You have security things, you have project management tools. So a lot of cool stuff here inside GitHub. For now, we're just going to use collaborative coding. Checking this doesn't mean that we can't use the other ones. This is just like a survey. So here we have a paid version, but for now we can just continue to use the free one. Now we are getting in. This is so cool. I love this new account creation process on GitHub. And now we have our space. The first thing we can do inside here is create a repository or repo. We can go here and click create repo. I'm going to link this repo to the one we are already working locally, the project 1 that we started in the first lessons. So to do that, first you need to create it on GitHub. It doesn't matter if you create it here first and then you start working on your machine, or if you already have some code on your machine and then you create the Git repo later. It really doesn't matter, because once we have both created, we can just link both of them. So for this, I'm just going to type something like Git course project 1. This is available. Maybe let's not use capital letter here. All right, so Git course project 1. Now you should mark if this is public or private. If you mark private, only you will have access. And when people view your GitHub profile, they won't see the repo. If you mark as public, you can send people the link. They can clone, they can work on the project with you, but of course you choose who can commit, which is something very important. It's not because it's public that anyone can go there and change your code. You choose who can commit to your repo, but being public, everyone will be able to see and make a copy to work on their own computer. So here you choose if you want a README file. We won't need it for now. There's also this git ignore option that we haven't covered yet. We're going to speak about this a bit later in the course. So for most beginner projects, you can just choose a name, decide if you want it public or private, and click create repository. So here it's giving us some instructions, and this is important because we have two options. So like I said, it doesn't matter if you create it here first or on your computer first. In this case, we already have a repo initiated on our computer. We already made some commits there. This is not going to be a new repository. If it was, we could just follow this. So if you look at the instructions, it's pretty straightforward. We don't have to use all of these commands. The ones that will be important here would be git init to start a repo on a folder in our computer. And once we have a repo initialized, you can make a comment if you want, but it's completely optional. You also should change the branch. That's going to be important because remember that our main branch is called master, while here on GitHub, the main branch is called main. So we're going to have to correct this so both have the same main branch. so we can make sure that we know in which branch we have the code that it's live on our website. But we're going to do this in a second. Now, this is the important line that it's going to link both repos. When we run this command inside that folder, it is going to connect both repos. So what's going to happen here is that, remember, I told you about the extra step that we are going to need to use when we have a remote server. This is the only extra step. So after you do everything, you save your changes, you do a commit, you are going to use this command to push your commit to the remote server. So this is going to be stored on GitHub, and both the code on GitHub and on your computer will be the same. Now, the option that we are going to use is this one. We already have a repo created, so we are just going to add the remote origin. So let's do this and see what's going to happen. So we are inside VS Code. Let me open the correct folder, which was for project 1. Not for this JavaScript complete site, but the first project we were working on. So going here, let's open the terminal. So terminal, new terminal, and let me run the command to add the remote origin. Let's do this. And as you can see, we don't have any errors here. And if you want to check if everything's correct, you can run git remote -v, and then you can see that this is the URL for the remote server. So now that we have this, both of them are linked, and once we finalize any changes, once we do commits, we can push it to the remote server. Now, one thing important here, you need to decide if you want to change the name of this branch or on GitHub. I personally prefer to use the main name, because every new repo that you create on GitHub, it's going to have main by default. If you want to change it there, you can as well. But in this case, I just think it's easier to rename our master to main. So in order to do this, it's pretty simple. This is not something that you're going to be doing a lot with Git. You shouldn't be changing branch names. This is just something for the beginning of the project. We just started with it. We just want to make sure that this is the same name as we have on Git. So we're only going to do this once. It's not very normal to change branch names, only on specific occasions. So Command-Shift-P, rename branch. So as you can see, it's master. We can call it main. And now this is the main branch. If we run git status, we can see we are on branch main. We can see main written down here. So this is all fine. Now, if we go back to Git, let's see if something changed here. I'm just going to click in the link for the repo. And as you can see, there's nothing going on here yet. We should be seeing our code, but we haven't done anything yet. The only thing we did was linking both repos. Now, every time we do something, like I said before, we are going to have to publish the branch. Since we haven't done that yet, we don't see the code on GitHub. But once we do this first, then we are going to see the branch there. So there are two options that you can use. If you want to do it from the command line, you can just use this code, git push -u origin main. So here it is going to make sure to push this to the origin. You don't have to worry about the origin because we already have it correctly set. As you can see, we added the origin, and now when we use the origin keyword, it is going to link to this URL. And main is the branch. So it is important that we push to the correct branch. So either use this code or you can just click publish branch. Now here we are seeing this error message because we need some authentication. Let's open the Git log. As you can see, we have authentication failed. So we are going to have to do one extra step, but this is going to have to be done only the first time. So we need to go back to GitHub. So here we need to go to the account icon at the top right. We can go to settings, and then you have password and authentication. Now, once we click to publish the branch, we're going to see the extension GitHub wants to sign in using GitHub. So you can use this, and then it's going to ask you for the name and password in the web browser. we can just click allow, and then it is going to open GitHub for you to do the authentication. This is the site that opened. Then you can authorize Visual Studio Code. Go back to Visual Studio Code, and here there will be an URL for you to do the authentication. So since we are already logged in the browser, this happened automatically. I just had a pop-up window and the login process happened normally. We also saw this message at the bottom right here asking if we want Visual Studio Code to do automatic fetches. We don't have to do that now. I'm going to talk about this a bit later. So right now, our code should be in the remote server already. So let's go back there to see. As you can see, here is where the login happened. The process to do the login outside of this Visual Studio Code extension might be a bit different, and sometimes it could be a bit confusing on how you should do things. If you encounter any problems in this authentication part, just let me know. Leave a question in the Q&A section with more details and screenshots, and I can help you out. So I can already close this. If I go back to the repo, let me go back there. Now, when we check that code tab at the top here, as you can see, we already pushed the content of our repo to the remote server, and both of them are linked. This is great stuff because now if something happens to our computer, we can make sure that all the code is safe stored here on GitHub. And now we just have to make sure that every time we do something locally on our machine that we push to the remote server so they are always in sync. So that was all for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Hey there, in the previous video we created our GitHub account and we pushed the code to the remote repo. Now you need to learn 2 extra steps that you have to take when you start working with remote repos. So let's go to Visual Studio Code. And if you're working on a remote repo with other people, that's important to mention, because if you are working by yourself, you're the only person pushing changes to the project, then of course you will always have the updated code. So this part is not going to be that necessary. But when you work with more people on a project, before starting your work in the morning, it's better that you do a pull so you make sure you have the most updated code. So in order to do that, we are going to run the git pull command. But before we do that, let's just remember how we are in terms of branches. So if we run a git status, we are on the main branch. That's the only branch that we have in our project right now. Another interesting thing that you can run here is the git remote show origin. If you type that, it's going to give you the URL for the origin. So as you can see, our repo has already these URLs configured. And that's important to understand because when we run the git pull, we could add the origin ourselves. We could add a different origin. But since this is correctly configured, we can just omit. So if we run git pull, it is going to automatically pull from that origin that we have configured and from the branch that we are right now. Since we are on the main branch, we are trying to pull from the main branch. We can just write these 2 words, git pull, and things will be pulled automatically. It says already up to date because we were the ones who pushed the code for the last time, so of course we have the same version as there is on GitHub. But again, if you are working with more people, you will see that every time you run a git pull, there will be something being downloaded to your machine because your colleagues will be always sending updates to the repo. So this is the first step. This is something to be done before you start a work. So now I'm going to open a new branch. And this is a good practice. Always before starting a new branch, just run a git pull to make sure you get the updated code from the remote repo. Now let's start a new branch. So I'm going to hit Ctrl-Shift-P. Let's choose the create branch option. And the name, I'm not going to include any ticket number right now. I'm just going to name it JavaScript work. For this example, it's fine. Okay, so now that I created this branch, I'm going to start doing the JavaScript work on our project. So I'm going to add a new file. I'm going to name it main.js. And here on the HTML, I'm going to include the link for that file. So script, source, main.js. We can save this, and here I'm just going to run a console.log. And that's all for the work I'm going to do now. So let's remember, what do we do when we finish a piece of work? We do a commit to create a new version. So I'm going to write a message like initiated JavaScript work. Don't forget, before you do that, to include the files to the staging area. This is an important step. So now I just added the two files, and I'm going to press commit. So now I committed my changes, and the second extra step that I mentioned is pushing your code to the remote repo. So before you start your work, always do a pull so you can get the updated code from the server. And when you finish your work, you should push everything to the remote repo. Should you do that now or only when you finish your task? You should always do that every day. Don't keep code on your machine only, because if something happens to your machine, you are going to lose your last updates. So always make sure at least once a day that you push your changes to the repo so your code is safe there. And also, if you need help from your colleagues to look at anything at your code, they need the branch to be in the server so they can download it. So the second extra step is going to be the push command. Let me start the terminal again, and to push the changes to the remote repo, it's the same. We can just do a git push. We don't need to add the origin because it's correctly set up, and the branch is going to be sent automatically. So let's press enter and see what's going to happen here. We got this error because it says that the branch JavaScript work has no upstream branch. This means that the branch is not in the remote repo yet. So we're going to have to do something different, but only in the first time. So it is giving us the code right here. Let's understand. So we are doing the push the same way, but since we don't have the upstream branch, which is the branch set up in the remote repo, we are using this command, the set upstream, to create it on Git, and we are giving the branch name, which of course should be the same branch name that we have on our machine. So we can press enter, and now we created this branch on Git and pushed our changes. If we go back there, we can see that the changes are showing here. So let me try something. Let me try refreshing the page. I still don't see the JavaScript file. Why is that? Because we are on the main branch. Let's remember that those changes were done to the JavaScript work branch. So if we do this, we click here, we can see that this version includes the main.js, but the main branch is safe without the new code. And when are we going to merge this into the main branch? When we finish the task, when it is approved, and when the project manager says it's time to publish live. While we are still working on the functionality, it should be on a separate branch. So now we know that our changes are here. Pretty cool. Now everything we change here, I'm just going to change the message. I'm just going to type welcome, save this, and let me write a message. So I'm going to commit my new changes, and now every time we want to push to the remote repo, we can do it directly. You can just type the git push. Now that we have the upstream branch, it's going to be done automatically. We won't have to set the upstream again like we did, or you can just click here. I think it's the easiest way. And it's saying that it's going to push and pull, which is always a good idea, because not only it's going to send the update we did, it's also going to get the updated code from Git, which means that we are going to be completely up to date with the project. So we can click OK, don't show again, and now we pushed the changes to GitHub. When we go back there, let's go to the JavaScript work branch. Let's see what we have inside main. And we can see that the new message is already here. So that was all for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Hey there, in this video let's review the workflow that we are going to use when working with remote repos. So let's pretend that the functionality we are working right now is this mobile menu. Nothing happens if I click here because I don't have any JavaScript code yet. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code and I'm going to copy the code from the original project. Let me paste it right here, save it, and when we go back to the browser, I can click the menu and open it. This part down here is not working because I don't have the image files, but let's pretend everything is good here just so I don't have to copy over the images. So let's say all is working fine. I send this to the tester approves the ticket, and now it's ready to be published live. Let's remember the steps we took when we finalize our work. So first, I need to do the commit for the change that I just did. So I'm going to add it to the staging area and I'm going to write a message like finalized header menu. Let's do the commit. And now every time we do a commit here, it is going to suggest that we do the sync. I think it's always a good idea to do this. If you don't want to be pushing things to the remote server all the time, you could work like the whole day and then in the end of the day, you push all your changes. Or maybe do it twice a day. This is going to be up to you. So in this case, I'm going to sync this with the remote repo. We can go back to GitHub to see if it's all there. Let's select the JavaScript work branch. And if we go to the main.js, we can see the new code is here. Now let's do the merge with master. Let's remember that. Let's open the command line just so we don't forget these commands. Let's practice a bit from the terminal. Let's remember that when we want to finalize a feature, and I'm calling this merging this branch with the main branch. This is what I call finalize the feature. The first thing we need to do is switch to the main branch. We can do this easily by running git checkout main. And now we are already on main. And now we can just run git merge, and then we need to include the name of the branch. Let's remember that the name of the branch is JavaScript work. Okay, so now we merged all the changes to the main branch. We are on the main branch, so we can just go to the JS file just to confirm that everything is here. So everything has been merged into the main branch. And now we can sync this with the origin. Let's remember that from the command line, we can just use git push. And now we just pushed our code to the remote repo. Let's go back there. Let's go to the main branch. And we can see that now the main branch has the main.js file with all the code we wrote. So we would be ready to publish the changes. How would that work? How is the process of publishing a website? Once you do the merge to the main branch, you make sure that all the new changes are in the main branch, and you always synchronize it with the remote server, which means that you have the most updated code. So now you would just open FileZilla and transfer these files to the server. Remember that every time you switch a branch using Git, your local folder will reflect the branch, okay? So if I start a branch and start a new file, when we use that branch, when we ask Git to select that branch, we are going to see this file here. But when we go back to the main, we won't see it anymore, okay? So your local folder will always reflect the files and the state of the code of the branch you are selected with Git. So this is how it would work. We could publish the website, and now we need to delete the branch because we don't want to keep garbage in our repo. We already finalized the work. We merged with the main branch. If we run a git log, we can see that comment here in the main branch, finalize header menu. So now we can delete the branches. Let me start a new one. And now we are ready to delete the branch. Let's remember that if we were in the JavaScript work branch, we wouldn't be able to delete it. We would have to switch to the main first. But now we are already on the main, so we can safely delete that branch. So to delete it locally, we can run git branch. And this is a bit shorter than the command we learned before. We can just use the -d and then the name of the branch, which is JavaScript work. Let's remember that if you just type git branch, let's just try it out. If you just type git branch, you will see the list of branches that you have. So you can just copy from here if you are not sure the name of the branch. But I think it's easier to use the Command Shift P. I'm just trying to practice the commands a bit. So I'm going to do this, and we just deleted the branch, but the branch is only deleted locally. If I run git branch right now, we only have main, but if we go back to Git, let me just refresh the page. You can see that here we still have both branches. So how do we delete it? In the remote repo, we can run git push -d origin and then the name of the branch. We type this and we deleted the branch in the remote repo. So if we go back there, let's go to the root of this repo. Now we are in the main branch. If we click here, we don't see that branch anymore. So we just finished our work. We merged our changes to the main branch, published the website online, and then we deleted the branch both locally and remotely. So now we can make sure that our repo is clean. So that was it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Hey there, in this section, we're gonna be seeing some examples using a GUI client for Git. First, let's see what is a GUI client. If we type GUI definition, we will see that it's short for Graphical User Interface. So what it is just an application, a piece of software that we can use to perform actions. So if we type GUI clients for Git, we can see this search results to the official page. So these are the softwares that we can use to work with Git. Many developers that I worked with prefer to use Git from a software like this instead of using the command line or Visual Studio Code. It depends on your preference. There's no right or wrong way. If you prefer from the command line or from the source control in Visual Studio Code because it's faster, you can do it from there. But if you prefer to use an application like this, you can use it and there's no problem about it. To be honest, with very large repos, that it's very complex with too many people working at the same time, and sometimes you have problems, you need to revert changes, it can be handy to be working from a software like this. Now here we have a few options depending on your operating system. Let's use GitHub Desktop because we have it for Mac and Windows. So let's click here to download. Let's download it for Mac OS. Or if you're using Windows, just download it for Windows. So let me install this. Double click on it. And here it's asking us to sign in, which makes sense because we're gonna have to do the push and pull from here. So let's sign in. So right now, since we are already logged in the web browser, everything is going to happen automatically. We just have to authorize desktop and open GitHub Desktop again. So let's let it use the GitHub account name and email address. Let's finalize this. And I'm going to move the GitHub Desktop to the applications folder so it's there every time I want to use it. So now it just restarted. So here we already have a few options at the start. We can create a new repo. We can clone a repo from the internet. We can create a new repo on the hard drive. To do those things, we already know how to do from the command line. So let's see what happens if we click our repo. The option that it's giving us is to clone this repo. This is not what we want. Remember that we are now logged into GitHub, which means that we are going to see all our remote repos. But this application does not know that we already have this in our machine. So if you want to open that repo that we are already working on here, we can add an existing repo from the hard drive. So let's go to the path. That's the project one. I'm going to open this, add repo, and now we have it right here. We can see that we can fetch from here. Let's remember that fetch is the process of pushing and pulling. So in this case, we would synchronize our branch with the remote repo. We don't have to do that because we know that this is already up to date. If you want to see the history of changes, you can see it here. So as you can see, it starts becoming easier to see the history of changes. Like I said, if you were working with a team of developers, it is much better to see the changes. If you click on the commits, you can see exactly what has been done. So everything you see in green are things that we added. So let's remember that we initiated the project. We only added these 2 files. And then I added the header section. So as you can see, we can see exactly from the green and the plus signs here on the left side that these were the new lines of code included in that commit. All right, so now that we have our repo open in the GitHub Desktop application, in the next lessons, we're going to learn how to run the basic commands from here. So creating a new branch, doing commits, pushing and pulling changes, and everything we've learned so far. I'll see you then. Hi there, in this video, we are going to learn how to do the basic Git commands using the GitHub Desktop application. So the first thing we are going to do here is start a new branch. We can see that we are in the main branch, and let's create a new branch so we can work on a new section of the website. So we could go to the top menu. On Windows, you should be seeing the top menu on the same window, but on Mac, the menu is at the top of the screen. So let's go to branch, new branch. Let's say I'm going to create a hero section. So I'm going to create this branch to work on a new hero section of the website. Let's create the branch. And now not only we created the branch, but we also switched. So if we go back to Visual Studio Code, check down here that the same thing happened inside. So how is it happening automatically here? Because let's remember that it's not Visual Studio Code that switches between branches, and it's not the GitHub Desktop application either. What makes we change between branches are the Git commands. When we use these interfaces like the source control or the app we are using right now, all they're doing behind the scenes is running basic Git commands, the same ones that we run from the command line. So now we already have it changed on Visual Studio Code. Let me close the terminal and let's start working on a brand new hero section. So right after the menu, before the main, I'm going to start a new section with the ID of hero. Right here, I'm just going to place an image file. Let's just copy a URL from the internet, just so we can use. Let me save this and see how it looks in the web browser. Let me set the width to 100%. And save this. We go back to the browser. We can see the hero section. So let's say this is done. We don't have to spend too much time on this. This is just an example. So let's say the hero section of the website is done. Let's go back to the GitHub Desktop application. And as you can see, it is already showing the changes. So we can see that we have this modified file, and we can see exactly what code have we added. And working from the GitHub Desktop app, we won't have to add the files to the staging area because they're going to show here checked by default. All we have to do is write the title of the commit. In this case, I'm just going to type hero section finished, and I'm going to commit to this branch. So now we can see that we have nothing pending here. If we go back to Visual Studio Code, we have all clean in the source control as well. So here, what we can do is publish our branch. So as you can see, working with an application will make these actions easier because you don't have to remember all the comments. You can just do the comment, and now you want to push it to the remote server. Remember that we had to run that command to create it in the remote server and then publish it. But with this application, this is going to be done automatically. We can click from up here, publish branch, or from here. So let's click here, publish branch. It is synchronizing with the origin. And if we go back to the remote repo right now, let's just refresh the page, see the branches we have. Let's click to view all branches. We can see that the hero section is showing here. So we can select it and view it on GitHub. If we go to the index.html, we will see the new code that we just added, which is right here. All right, so we just learned how to create a branch, how to publish a branch to the remote server and push changes. I'm going to make a change just so we can simulate more part of this work. So I'm going to change the image. Let's see how it looks in the web browser. Okay, let's pretend it's looking better. Now we can see this showing as pending here. If we go to the GitHub Desktop App, we can see exactly the code we removed. So the old image and the code we added with the new URL. Let's do the commit. I can just type something like updated hero image. Remember that if you work for a company and you have tickets, always include the ticket number both in the branch and in the commit messages. It's always good when you are looking at historical data trying to find things. So let's commit it and let's push to origin. Remember that we only made these changes locally, so let's push it to the origin. So now this is updated in the remote server. Now let's merge this with the main branch. Let's say we are done with this change. And first, let's remember that we need to change branches. So in order to do that easily, we can just click here and go to the main branch. We are in the main branch. If you want to make sure that you are synchronized with the remote repo before you go ahead, I think it's a good practice. Just click here. It is going to make sure to update with the remote server. And now you can do the merge. So let's go to branch, merge into current branch. We want to merge the hero section with the main branch. Let's create a merge commit. And now in the main branch, we already have the hero section. If we go to the browser, we can see that that's the version open in the browser. And let's click push origin. Now everything has been updated. If we go to GitHub, let's go to the main branch. So this is the main branch. When we see the index.html, the code we added for the hero is right here. So we would be ready to publish the changes to our hosting server, to our website, so it shows live. And now we can delete the branches. So let's change to that branch, hero section. Let's select branch and delete. And the good thing again about using the app, as you can see, we don't have to run two commands to delete locally and remotely. We can just press this button and it is going to delete the hero section branch both on our machine and on GitHub. So let's choose delete. And now we don't see this branch here anymore. If we go to Visual Studio Code, let's type git branch. We only have the main. And if we go to GitHub, we only have the main branch here as well. So that was all for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Hi there, in this video you will learn how to resolve conflicts from the GitHub Desktop App. So let's simulate a change that will generate a conflict. I'm going to change the URL for this image. So let me just change this real quick. Let me save, let me go back there. I'm just using super simple examples just so we don't waste time here. This image seems to be stretched, but that's fine. That's just for this example. So I just changed it here. And I'm going to commit the change. So the change is showing right here. I'm going to name this updated hero image. Let me complete to red one. It's fine. Let's do the comment. And we now have the comment. And let's remember that this is only in our local machine. We didn't push it to the origin yet, but before pushing it to the origin, let's simulate a conflict. Now let's go to the HTML file. Let's open this in GitHub Dev. So let's pretend I'm a different developer working on this project, and I'm going to change that image as well. So I'm just going to pick something different here. Let me update the source. Pretty cool. Now we can save this. And when we go to the source control, let's add a message of updated hero image to black one. This is the one I got right now from the internet, just for this example. So now let's press commit and push. So the image is the respawn. Let's go to GitHub. We go to the index, let's look for that image, and this is the one we just updated from here. So we just simulated another developer working on the project. So the other developer worked on the project, changed this image, and pushed his changes to the remote server. So now on our local machine, we were also working on the same image. This is the Mercury one. So now we are going to try to sync the local and remote repos, and we are going to have a conflict because Git will see two changes in the same element. So let's see how this is going to appear in the GitHub Desktop App. Remember, we already committed the changes, so now let's just try to push the changes to the remote server. Let's click Push Origin, and it is telling us that we can't push because there are changes in the remote server. So let's click Fetch to get all the changes and synchronize the branches. It's telling us to pull one commit that we don't have in the local machine. Let's click Pull Origin. And now it's telling us that we have a conflict. Now the default action here is opening on Visual Studio Code. So let's go to Visual Studio Code. Let's go to Resolve in Merge Editor. So as you can see, we as developers would be able to check both images, check with the project manager, check with the designer to make sure what is the correct image to be shown here. Let's say this is the one, the Mercury one. So let's make sure we have the correct image. All right, this is the correct image. We checked with everyone. We are 100% sure that this is the correct one. So let's complete the merge. And if we go back to the application, it says that the conflicts are resolved, so we can continue with the merge. So now we already resolved the conflicts in our local machine. Now we just need to push to the origin, just click to go ahead, and everything is now up to date. So two people worked in the same element. By the time we tried to update the remote repo, there was a conflict. We solved the conflict in our machine and then pushed the changes to the remote repo. So now we pushed a code that didn't have any conflicts. If we go to history, we can see what we've done here. So when we merged, now let's go to GitHub one more time. Let's go to the index.html. And right here, we will see the Mercury image, which is the one we selected while resolving the conflict. So that was all for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Hi there, in this video you will learn how to revert commits from the GitHub Desktop App. So if we go to history, we can see all the commits. Let's see the state of our website, the one that is live. Let's pretend this is the one that is live. And here we worked on this functionality. We also added the image after we worked here. And let's say for some reason there is a problem inside here, so we shouldn't be showing this menu. We just received an urgent request to undo the JavaScript part that we did here. This shouldn't be opening like this. So the first thing we would think to do would be to just come here to the JavaScript file, delete or comment all this, and the commit will be, let's say, undone. But the problem is that we shouldn't be doing that manually, because normally when we have to revert something, we won't be talking about just a few lines of code in one file. We're going to be talking about multiple files being changed on multiple areas of the page. So it's always good that you use the revert function. So to do that, we can go to the GitHub Desktop App. Let's remember that this is when we added that code. So what we're going to do here is just right click and select Revert Changes in Commit. So as you can see, it created a new commit that deleted that code and put back the console.log that we had. Now, if we go to changes, we don't have any changes staged, but we have some pushes to be done. We need to make sure that the remote repo is up to date. So let's click Push Origin. And if we go back now to GitHub, we can check the main.js, and as you can see, we don't have that code here anymore. So whenever things go wrong, you should always revert the commit instead of trying to remove things manually. And now in the history, we have something here that in the future, if we have to look back at the history of what happened in the branch, if we want to understand why is that menu not working again, we will see that at this date, we reverted that commit. And now one cool thing is that we haven't lost anything in the history. We still have that commit, even though it was reverted here, we still have it in the history. And if we want to continue working on this code so we can fix whatever was wrong, we could right click and create a branch from this commit. Let's name it fix header menu. We can create the branch. We are inside it right now. If we go to Visual Studio Code, we are inside this branch and we have the code to work. So now we could fix everything that has to be fixed. Let's say adding those images that were missing or whatever we would have to do here to fix. When it's approved, when it's ready to go live, then we know what to do. We just merge this branch with main and sync it with the remote repo. So this was a quick way of reverting past commits. The action I just did of opening a new branch, it's not going to be necessary all of the times. I'm just giving you an example where we had to urgently revert something to publish it again. But now we can open a new branch so we don't lose that code, so we can continue working on that, making the changes that are needed, making sure it's tested and approved. And when it is, we can move this to the main branch again so we can publish it live. All right? So that was it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.